With me now, Mark Leibovich, staff writer for The Atlantic and an MS Now political contributor. Charlie Sykes is author of To the Contrary on Substack. And Julie Roginski is Democratic strategist and author of the Salty Politics newsletter on Substack. Good to see all of you. So, Julie, at the heart of the midterm fight, just as a reminder, is whether Democrats can take control of the House. No doubt Dems won the battle last night, but is it too early to say they've won the war?
Well, as somebody who does campaigns for a living, I never want to sit there and rest on my laurels, so I'm not going to be complacent about it. I will say, if you look at every special election that has taken place since Donald Trump's own election, Democrats have been overperforming tremendously. You saw that just last week in New Jersey 11, where Ana Lilia Mejia won a 20-point landslide for a seat to fill Governor Mikey Sherrill's former House seat. And you see that consistently over and over again, including in Virginia yesterday. Look, the reality is that Donald Trump's numbers are abysmal, and that is a yoke that no Republican should want around his or her neck going into the midterm elections this November.
Charlie, are we now in a situation where control of Congress will be determined by whoever redistricts more effectively, as opposed to which party fields the better candidate?
Well, I mean, that's certainly possible. But I think, look, Donald Trump launched this war, and pretty much like the war in Iran, he thought it was going to be a quick and easy victory. He didn't count on the opposition fighting back. I think it looks like it's going to be either a dead heat or it backfired. But to Julie's point, the redistricting now becomes secondary to this. The overall mood of the electorate, which is turning against the Republicans. And, Donald Trump, I guess we're finding out that being tone deaf, erratic, and vengeful is not a good look. It is not necessarily appealing to the people who are going to be voting in November. So I think the overall political environment is now more important than redistricting. Not to say that it is not incredibly important, but I think that the very cynical attempt to rig the midterm elections has come up short, and I don't think is going to have anything close to.
Has it come up short, or has it backfired?
Well, we'll find out. I mean, we'll find out, as you mentioned, two things. Number one, we'll see what the courts do. We'll see what happens in Florida. But we're in sort of this cycle of retaliation. This is a necessary evil. I mean, I hope that at some point we have real gerrymandering reform. But right now, it does seem like it's an eye for an eye. And we'll see whether we end up blind or whether or not we come up with a system that actually works.
Mark, I want to dig a little deeper into the poll numbers. A couple of them really stuck out to me. First of all, Trump's overall approval rating among Republicans. For a long time, that was stuck in the 90s. Now it's at 68%. And by the way, just 44% among non-MAGA Republicans. And if you look at independents, that is a overall job approval rating that is dismal. 23%, 19% on the economy, 12% approval on the cost of living. So to Julie's point again, if you're a moderate Republican running for Congress, is there something you can say or do to get voters to look past the president?
Yeah, break with him. I mean, criticize him. I mean, be out front about it. You can basically do the thing that all of them have collectively refused to do pretty much from the start, and certainly in this term. So, I mean, it's all out there. It's been out there for several months now. And, the one block that has been pretty sturdy, I mean, like we just saw, I mean, Republicans, actual MAGA voters are slipping. It's slipping across the board. It's basically not slipping with elected Republicans in the House and in the Senate. I mean, you see a few here and there. But, I mean, this goes to their own cowardice. It goes to their own fear, whatever you want to call it. It politically is very questionable at this point, and they could pay a real price in November.
Yeah, Charlie, he said something I think is important, which is at this point. Earlier, the argument you heard was Republicans who are running for office this November are afraid that if they go against Trump, he will primary them. Well, for most of them, the primaries are over. They know they're running. I suppose there is a money question. Arguably, you can go out and say, look, the party's not giving me any money because I did what I thought was right. I went against Donald Trump. I'm just trying to figure out the why at this moment that a Republican would choose, if they're in a tough race, not to say anything bad about Donald Trump or the way he's been handling the war or the economy.
Well, after 10 years of watching this, I think we have a pretty good insight into the cowardice of the Republicans. Look, I think that a lot of these, the Republicans, even the ones that know that they're going down, also understand that breaking with Donald Trump is not simply about losing re-election. It's about being excommunicated. MAGA has the ability to call out the flying monkeys on social media, to attack them, to vilify them. They would lose business opportunities. They would be condemned by their local parties. So, this fever is far from breaking. The numbers are really extraordinary when you see the non-MAGA Republicans turning against them. But right now, this party is still in thrall to Donald Trump. It is still a cult. And the nightmare scenario, of course, is that as Donald Trump drags them down, I think very few of them are going to, untie the leash, because, again, the price is, Donald Trump has made the price very, very high. We'd no longer be able to shelter under the wings of his amorality and his corruption, and his campaign of vengeance.
Julie, the AP poll shows one more thing I want to point out. The unfavorable rating for both Democrats and Republicans, essentially the same, within the margin of error, 55% and 56%. So what do you think that means, and what do you do with that if you're on the campaign trail?
I think Democrats are looking for fighters, and I think the disapproval rating for Democrats largely centers around the fact that a lot of Democrats themselves don't think that our leaders in Washington are doing everything they can to communicate their horror at what's happening and using every tool at their disposal. Some of us are old enough to have lived through Mitch McConnell's leadership when he was in the minority, and understand that there are tools that are available to the minority leader to be able to stymie a lot of the president's agenda, which for some reason are not being used right now. So that part, I think, you're seeing play out in the primaries, and you're seeing that over and over again, where you have these very high profile Senate races, whether it's in places like Michigan or places like Maine, where you have primaries that are centered around the fact that there are people who do not think that the current leadership and whoever they're supporting is necessarily doing everything they can to stand up to Trump in the way that voters expect today. Having said that, I think Democrats will crawl over broken glass to send a message to Donald Trump this November, and will stow any dissatisfaction they have with the Democratic Party. I think the same goes for independents. I think you're seeing that even happen to non-MAGA voters, because they will either stay home at their disgust of both parties, which does not help Republicans, or they might hold their noses and vote for a Democrat just simply to say, listen, we cannot continue to have our party be in thrall to this human and to this person who's continuously done everything possible to make our own personal lives that much harder.
Yeah, one of the things that, Mark, when I talk to people, they talk about is the low propensity voter, right? Or the people who are choosing now to stay home. Politico says that the White House is shifting into midterm mode. That means hitting the road, giving red meat speeches to frustrated voters. Our correspondent, Alex Tabbitt, went to Florida to ask some voters to respond to a familiar claim from President Trump. Take a listen. It's interesting.
We had the best economy in the history of our country in my first term, and we're blowing it out now. We're blowing it away now.
I disagree with him. I think he's gaslighting us or delusional.
That's what he does, just talking. I think he does it for like laughs and giggles or something. But that's not true, though.
Maybe the first time he was elected, but not now. No, I'm sorry. No, not now. I'm not saying yes or no to his terms, but the term right now, it sucks.
I think it's a dog and pony show. And they're going to tell us anything to distract us from what's actually happening.
So as I hear that, these aren't just people who are frustrated with Trump's policies. They think he is either lying or incompetent. Is this going to be an election where you just go after the middle, or are those people gettable in some way if you can just convince them there actually is competence out there, there is truth out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's largely up to whoever the candidate is in that jurisdiction. But I do think that those views, I don't know if they were Trump voters or not. I mean, I assume not all of them were, if any of them. But
a lot of them had not voted in recent elections at all. So these are people who are kind of fed up with the political system or not so interested. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I mean, certainly the Democratic base is extremely, extremely energized. I think to the extent that there is a middle, if they vote, it's absolutely going to vote Democratic or, overwhelmingly. And, we've seen even when Donald Trump is on the ballot, the big sort of existential issue for Republicans in the last 10 years has been how do they perform when Trump isn't on the ballot? So there's systemically a problem this year, but there's even a sense that even if Donald Trump were on the ballot, he's not guaranteeing that even his supporters would come out and support him. So, yeah, look, I mean, I think there is, by way of caution, there's a bit of premature exuberance going on among Democrats that I talk to. That's just my opinion, because I do think that Democrats partly are in this position because they dug such a hole for themselves in 2024. And here they are. And yes, there might be signs that better days are ahead. But the fact is they're starting from a pretty low position. But the indicators are certainly positive.
Yeah, they are positive, which brings me back to you, Julie, because you touched on this in your first answer. But one thing I do hear from Democrats is that they worry, as they always want to do, but they worry about overconfidence. They worry, they look at poll numbers like that and think in any individual district, in any individual congressional race, that Donald Trump being unpopular is necessarily the driving force in that particular election. Is overconfidence a concern?
It's always a concern, and anybody who does campaigns for a living knows you cannot be overly confident until the moment the polls close and the votes are counted. So I would work just as hard if I were working on campaigns, which I am this year, if I were in an environment where it's 1994 and I'm a Democrat and the Republicans are about to sweep the House for the first time in 40 years, as I would now with the wind seemingly at our backs. We just cannot be complacent. And we have to understand also, as you pointed out, our own party is not particularly popular with the voters. It is fine to coast in on the back of the horror that Trump has inflicted on the American people right now. And that's what's probably going to happen, although we'll see what happens in November. But once we're there, we have to perform, and we have to come up with a strategy to get people not just to vote against the other party, but to vote for our party. And that's a much harder task when Donald Trump is not going to be around, hopefully much longer to inflict everything he's inflicting on the American people right now.